Thank you for joining us for the first session in our new webinar series, Inside Mail. This series is designed to give you insight into the key topics that are shaping our industry, delivered in short, bite-sized sessions that we hope will help you stay informed and inspired. Today's session explores how mail can be used to build trust within the charity sector. We'll be sharing fresh insights from the latest Marketreach research study, highlighting how mail continues to play a powerful role in connecting charities with supporters in meaningful and credible ways. Thank you again for being here, and let's get started. I'm Laura Sanjurgo. I am the Commercial Director for the Whistl Mail Division.
And I'm Jen Rufus, Head of Product Strategy and Industry Engagement, also for the Whistl Mail Division.
And today we're joined by Mark Griffith and John Eddolls, Media Specialists at Marketreach. So I'll hand over to John Eddolls, who's going to take you through the key insights.
Morning. It's that time of year and I find myself full of cold and sore throat. So if I sort of croak a bit, I sort of apologise now. So today we're talking about something that underpins every relationship in the charity world: trust. Without trust, donations dry up, volunteers drift away, and impact stalls. But with trust, a charity can thrive. So let's explore how trust works, why it matters, and how it can play a powerful role in building it. Thought it wasn't moving. But before we do, I'd just like to introduce you to Marketreach. We're part of Royal Mail, and our mission is to help organisations like yours make the most of your mail. We do this through research, insight, creative critiques, workshops, and incentives. In short, we're here to prove with evidence how mail can strengthen your communications, and we do all of this free of charge. So let's take a look at the trust research. Excuse me. So trust globally is under pressure. We find ourselves in a world surrounded by scandals and conspiracy theories, and these have all chipped away at our confidence in our politicians, business leaders, and organisations. Add AI, influencers, fake news, and of course the recent scandal that rocked the BBC, or has rocked the BBC, and suddenly truth feels harder to spot. In fact, 63% of UK adults struggle to tell legitimate interest from deceptive content. Charities are often held to higher standards than commercial organisations. People give when they feel a personal connection, when they see transparency, and when behaviour matches the message. But here's the challenge: 46% of UK adults who haven't donated recently say it's because they don't trust charities to spend that money wisely. That's nearly half of potential donors lost to mistrust. If you want to compare this against donors and non-donors alike, it's 27% of the UK adult population. So, oh, sorry, my slide hasn't flipped.
Yeah.
There you go. So traditional measures like NPS scores or brand trackers don't really capture the deeper motivations behind trust. They tell us if people like a brand, but not why they trust it or how that trust can be grown. That's why we've gone further, building a more forensic understanding of trust. So we know that trust matters, but consumers are finding it really hard to trust organisations. As a channel owner, our research often starts with mail, but we wanted to go broader this time because we already knew from past research that mail is trusted. We wanted to understand trust at a deeper level and understand the why, the how, and what this means for organisations. And so we asked ourselves, does trust have a commercial value and create a competitive edge? What does trust look like at a human level? Does trust matter in communications? And are some channels trusted more than others? For this, we adopted a multi-stage approach. In this research, we set out to understand what really trust is in an organisation. To do this, we combined qualitative and quantitative research. As you can see on the left, we spoke to academics and experts, and we also, experts, and we also spent time with consumers through ethnographic studies and depth interviews to see how trust plays out in everyday life. We asked direct questions to capture conscious opinions and benchmark trust levels across different sectors, including charities. This information was then used to scale up our methodology by using a large quantitative survey of over 4,000 representative adults. One of the key techniques we used was conjoint analysis. This is a method that doesn't just ask people what they think, but instead presents them with realistic choices. Respondents were shown different combinations of brand, media, and creative, and asked to pick the option that they trusted the most. By analysing these choices, we could see the trade-offs people make, for example, whether the credibility of the organisation outweighs the channel, or whether the wording of the message matters more than who delivers it. Conjoint analysis is powerful because it reveals sort of hidden preferences that people often can't articulate directly, giving us a much richer picture of how trust is formed. We also use structural equation modelling, or SEM, which is a sophisticated statistical type of technique designed to untangle complex sort of cause and effect relationships. In our case, we evaluated 125 attributes and 1.5 million data points to identify not just correlations, but the actual drivers of trust. SEM allowed us to quantify the commercial value of trust, showing how it influences not only brand consideration, but also consumer behaviour, and to map out the underlying structure of trust itself. So our research revealed something powerful. Trust is measurable. It has hard commercial value. And of course, it can be built. We identified 8 core pillars of trust and a 3-part communications formula: brand, media, and creative. Together, these show how trust is made and how it can be grown. And this gave us a framework that organisations can use to build trust strategically and consistently.
Thanks, John. Good morning, everyone. So as John said, the research that we did, there were 3 main outputs to it. And the first issue that we wanted to look at is, what is the value of trust? And I think we all know that in our everyday lives, trust is important. The question that we were really trying to get to the bottom of here was, how important is trust in a commercial context? Does it impact the bottom line, or is it just a nice to have? So the first thing we did to answer that question was we did some desk research. And what we found is that there's a lot of research out there about trust. And one particular piece of research that was particularly interesting was this one, which is from the Advertising Association and the IPA. And what they found was that trust is the second most important metric for driving business effects. And so they define driving business effects as driving sales, driving customer attention, driving profit, and market share. And also interestingly, in 2000, it was 6th. So in that sort of 24-year period, it's risen from 6th place to 2nd place. And I suppose if we reflect over what's happened in the world over the last however many years, it's not difficult to understand why trust has become more important. So having done this desk research, we then decided to look at the issue ourselves. And what we found was that trust, we found the same as the AA and the IPA research. So trust is the second biggest driver of brand relationships. In fact, 59% of people said that their reason for choosing an organisation or brand is trust. And so trust is a key differentiator, which gives a competitive advantage. And so in the words of one charity expert, if I don't like what you're doing, what you've done, or I don't feel my money can be trusted with you, then you're not going to do the best with it. So I said 59% of people said that trust was the most important factor, 59%, 6 out of 10. So 6 out of 10 people said that trust is critical to brand choice. But what does that really mean? Because we're trying to understand here what the impact is on the bottom line. So that was the next part of this section of the research that we looked at. And what we found is that trust is key to driving a commercial action. In fact, 92% of people said that consumers will act or do something if they trust a brand. 74% of consumers will act in a commercially impactful way if they trust a brand. So the next slide, I'm just going to try and unpick what those two percentages really relate to. So here you've got a graph, and along the bottom, you've got all the different actions that an individual might take if they trust a brand or organization. And then the ones in black are those that we've defined as commercially impactful. So if you look at those, you'll see that the first one's use the service or product more, spend more money with them, participate in a loyalty program, explore, try or purchase new or additional products, and then lastly, upgrade to a higher tier or premium product service. So all of those basically involve spending money or spending more money. And then the others in red are also important, but they perhaps have an indirect impact on the commercials. So it might be you recommend them to a friend or a family member, or you leave a positive review. So all of these are positive things, but they don't have a direct commercial impact. So just to recap then, so this is what the research found. 6 out of 10 people say that trust is an important factor when choosing a brand or organization. 92% say they will act or do something if they trust a brand. And 74% said they will act in a commercially impactful way, in other words, spend money, if they trust a brand or organization. But what we also wanted to do was look at the sort of the negative side of trust, the dark side of trust, if you like. The cost of being mistrusted is essentially you lose your revenue stream. And our research supported that. What we found is that loss of trust leads to huge financial risk. 60% of those who have previously used a brand but have since stopped say they don't trust this brand. And I think that's interesting because if you remember, I said 59% of people choose a brand because they trust it. Well, this is saying is 60% of people don't choose a brand because they don't trust it. So effectively, trust is driving both positive and negative behavior, whether it's mistrust or trust. And what this does is that this graph just summarizes some of the reasons why trust may have been eroded in the charity sector. And I think if you look at some of these, it's not difficult to think of examples where this may have happened. Negative media coverage or public scandals, they bombard me, poor value for money. So those are some of the reasons why trust may have been eroded specifically in the charity sector. So that's the end of the first section of our research, which I think clearly demonstrates that trust is more than a nice to have. It impacts the bottom line and has a commercial impact. The next thing that we wanted to do was to understand, well, what is trust? How do you break trust down? And what can you do to build trust? And what we did was we looked at 125 different attributes across 1.5 million data points. And we identified that there are 8 pillars of trust. And they are here represented here. Now, each of these 8 don't have an equal impact on trust. Some have a greater impact than others, but all of them have an impact of some sort. This slide is actually not charity specific, it's cross-sector, but what it tells you is that reliability is the most important and tenure is the least important. And in fact, in every case, fame, frequency of communication and tenure are the least important in terms of building trust. But what I want to do is just touch on each of these in a bit of detail. And when I just go through them, I want you to think about the things that you can do as part of your day-to-day jobs to build these pillars into your marketing activity. Because some of this it can be applied in a practical sense. So if we just take them one by one, I think we know what reliability is when promises and expectations are met repeatedly. Reciprocity. People are more likely to trust other organizations when they feel trusted by them. Trust is a two-way street. Aligned interest. Trust is strengthened by the perception that the other party has your best interests at heart. They do things for you rather than just taking money from you. Stake. Trust grows when both parties have something to lose. There is a balance between the risks the consumer takes by choosing an organization and the risk that that organization is exposed to. Familiarity. Consumers know and recognize the brand. Fame, a brand or organization is endorsed by other people the consumer trusts. Frequency of communication, obviously communicated regularly, and tenure, the length of someone's relationship with a brand or organization. And I think all of these are are things that you can take and practically build into your marketing activity to build trust. When we look at how these 8 pillars of trust apply to the charity sector, what we find, well, what the research finds is that actually 3 of them have very little impact on trust: fame, frequency of comms, and tenure. Now, I'm not saying that those pillars don't have an impact on a charity's bottom line, but they don't have an impact on trust and therefore an impact on bottom line, or at least that's what the research found. And so that the 5 pillars that really have an impact are reliability, reciprocity, aligned interest, stake, and familiarity. So as I said, these are things that I think if you think about what they really mean, they are things that could be practically fed into any activity that you do. So then just moving on to the third element of the research, which was looking at how communications activity is broken down and how each of those elements contribute towards levels of trust. So what we did was we broke communications activity down into sort of 3 logical components: brand, media, and creative. And what the research found was that brand represents around 50% of trust. I think when you think about that, it's not surprising at all. Perhaps what's more interesting is that media represents around 42%. And I guess what that's saying is that just by the sheer fact that you are communicating with your donors, you are building trust. And what's also interesting about that media element is that different channels have a different impact on trust. I'm going to touch on that in a second. And then lastly, creative. So creative also has an impact on trust, but it's a much smaller impact of around 8%, which I think confirms the idea that a great ant can't fix a bad brand. So just drilling down then on that sort of media element, what we found is that different channels have a different impact on trust. And in fact, direct mail has more than double the impact on trust than its next closest channel. So again, a bit like the pillars, this is something that's very practical, that you can decide how you implement your campaigns and what the media mix is if you're looking to impact trust. So in summary, trust has a powerful commercial value. It impacts the bottom line. It's comprised of 8 measurable attributes, or pillars as we call them, and I'm going to touch on the measurability in a second. Trust can be built with communication, and direct mail is the most trusted channel. So obviously this has been a whistle-stop tour. We deliberately sort of gave a sort of fairly high-level version of this research because we didn't want to take up too much of your time, but it was a big piece of research. And if you want to see the full research, please grab this QR code or go to the Marketreach website and just search for trust, and you'll come across the report. You'll also come across the trust tool that I mentioned earlier. And the trust tool is just an interesting way of playing around with the different elements of marketing to see how they impact trust. So essentially what you would do is you would select your sector, it's charity sector. You would then specify what size of charity you are. And reality is larger charities have higher levels of trust than smaller charities. That's what the research found. And there's really nothing you can do about that. It's just how it is. And then what you can do is you can say, well, actually, we're planning to implement activity that focuses on these particular pillars. And we're going to use these particular channels. And it will give you a trust score, and it will sort of demonstrate to you that by doing that, you can improve the levels of trust that you have. So it's just a way of sort of bringing to life the fact that trust is a very real thing. And what we didn't want to do was just present to you a high-level piece of research that you couldn't do anything with. So we've also pulled together a practical guide that gives you tips and practical things that you can do as part of your jobs in order to enhance trust as part of your marketing activity. And so if that's something that you'd be interested in having, then please get in touch with your Whistl account manager, and they will either arrange for us to present to you, or we can just send you the guide.